Tēnā koutou. It's great to be here. I was able to catch the last few sessions. My apologies, I wasn't here for the rest of the day. I was in Hamilton at a wind power conference. So my 4 minutes is this. The way I see the problem is that it's a problem of rationing. We have to ration nutrient input into fresh water, whether that's nitrogen or phosphorus, or indeed sediment. And we have to ration water abstraction. And we have to ration those in order to meet certain environmental limits. So that's the fundamental problem. We have a series of tools at our disposal to achieve those. So we have a pricing tool, whether that pricing is achieved by a levy, so a flat price, or whether it's by a market. Both of those, in effect, are rationing by some different kinds of price signals. We also have a tool of regulation, and we have a tool of subsidies. So we have a set of tools that are available to us, and they have certain strengths and weaknesses. The issues that I wanted to raise are around complexity. I think that some of the attempts to use markets in appropriate places can introduce a level of complexity that really overwhelms the purpose. And so in terms of, for example, water abstraction, we've tended towards support a resource rental model in order to try to reduce some of the complexity. It doesn't have some of the advantages of a market system, but it has certain advantages in terms of a flat price and simplicity of the system. And in terms of the level of subsidy required, I would really raise a flag. If you look at the TOPOR scheme, there was significant taxes went into that scheme, and if we tried to replicate that scheme across the country, we would bankrupt the country. And so in terms of subsidising the reduction in pollution that's coming off farms and point source pollution, I don't believe it's going to be very easy to have the same level of subsidy that we have in the TOPOR scheme across the country. So that means that's some quite difficult questions, and that becomes a very much a value judgment, and I endorse the comments that have been made that does become a value judgment. Because from one point of view, those who are adding pollutants into the system, whether it's nitrogen phosphorus leaching from intensive agriculture or whether it's phosphorus coming out of a point source sewage scheme, they're responsible for their pollution. And so they don't have a right to add pollution into the system. And so if the taxpayer is being asked to subsidise their reduction in pollution, looked at from that point of view, it becomes quite a big ask. Why should the taxpayer be subsidising people who are polluting the environment, or corporates or city councils? And can we afford to do that anyway as a society, subsidise the reduction right across the country? So I do have concerns about the level of subsidy that would be required, and I have concerns about the complexity. And that's why there are some real advantages to trying to use regulatory mechanisms as well as market mechanisms. The next point I wanted to make was about the dynamic response. Some of the modelling that was just presented I thought was very interesting, and I haven't had a chance to look at the underpinning assumptions of the modelling, but I think that we also need to acknowledge that when we ration nitrogen and phosphorus leaching and ration water abstraction, there will be a dynamic response of the industry. It won't just be a static response based on existing practice. So, for example, there will be people who come up with ways to make money out of low-intensity farming. And there are already people, of course, who are doing that. And we have different practices across New Zealand in terms of low-intensity farming, maintaining the same level of profitability while having lower nitrogen, phosphorus leaching and water abstraction. And so that is, I think, the kind of what we don't know is, that's a little bit of an unknown, is what will be the dynamic response of the industry in terms of intensive agriculture when we put those kind of constraints, when we ration the leaching of nitrogen, of phosphorus and water abstraction. And it seems to me that we need more actually investment in R&D around low intensity farming. We need to be able to say, how do we get the same level of profitability out of this out of this land use while reducing the nitrogen, phosphorus leaching and water abstraction? And that is the kind of low intensity question that I think actually requires much more investment, and I think is quite critical to our future. And the final thing I wanted to say, I think the dynamic response point is very important, but the final thing I wanted to say was actually just to reiterate the counterfactual. If we don't get it right, then we put brand New Zealand at risk, and you might talk about some short-term adjustment costs The long-term costs for New Zealand as a whole are very, very high if we don't get this right. Whether it's in terms of our brand, in particular, which is going to be one of our ongoing critical pieces of property as a nation, as brand New Zealand, and of course the other counterfactual is we will continue to get polluted rivers and lakes, and they will only get worse. So thank you very much.